Welcome to the Skull King Football Podcast, presented by Vox DFS Firelines. Now, here are your hosts, Justin and Ryan Skullrood.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Skull King Fantasy Football Podcast. I am Justin Skullrood, your host. Always with me is the founder of Skull King Fantasy Football, my brother Ryan.
Hey, everybody. How's it going tonight?
I don't know about you, but I had a horrible week in fantasy football, which was capped off by the disgusting performance of the Jets due to some unbelievable, well, not unbelievable performances, but because Drew Brees actually performed like he does. I had to try and get 40 points tonight from the Jets offense. I knew I was dead before the game started. But enough about my horrible week. Let's get into the wrap-up of this last week's fantasy football. We're going to get into a little bit of news and notes, and then we're going to do a little bit of highlights and then get into our pickups of the week, those who you should be targeting in your waiver wire pickups. Those that you should spend your fab cash on trying to grab in order to make your team better. Once again, we like to pride ourselves, though we are a smaller podcast, we want to get this information out to you as fast as possible. We will be one of the first podcasts that's available for you to get your pickup advice on who to grab for your waiver wire pickups. But into the news, the first bit of news we want to talk about is the Big Ben knee injury. Reports are that he has a partially torn meniscus in his knee that will require surgery, so he will be out a couple of weeks. There's not a lot of fear with him missing too much time because of the bye week. They are playing New England next week. So personally, if you can grab New England's defense, which will not be really available for pickups.
No, because guys like me already have New England's defense.
Yeah. New England's defense is going to have a field day with Landry Jones. Still play Le'Veon Bell. I would consider sitting Antonio Brown personally, but I would another option.
I wouldn't. Here's the deal. I would not sit Antonio Brown. However, if you have a stacked wide receiver core, New England's going to play tough on him. So in that case, yeah, you may, if you've got other options, if you have other great options. If not, well, you have to start AB. So
yeah, they're going to have to, if their defense plays anything like they did last week, they're going to have to put up points and they're going to have to throw, which means Landry Jones is going to have to throw, which I don't trust. But moving on, kind of the next person we want to cover is Eddie Lacy's situation. There's a couple of ways we can go with this with regards to how you deal with this, but because Starks is expected to miss 4 weeks as his backup, and the Packers are still not 100% on Lacy, they're promoting a practice squad running back onto the starting roster. But for me, I really like Ty Montgomery as a possible pickup to flex, because he's getting a lot of those check down catches that would have gone to Starks in a situation where Starks would be healthy. But Ty Montgomery got like 98 yards, 10 catches, great in PPR. He didn't score, but I believe this next week, if Eddie Lacy doesn't show vast improvement, I believe Ty Montgomery is going to have the same type of role for next week. And so that's kind of my view on that one. Ryan, do you have anything?
I think if you look at it, what it may come down to is that the Packers may actually start using their passing game, the short passing game, as their run game, kind of like New England's offense does. So yeah, they have Blunt, but they do a lot of short passes out of the backfield to James White, which makes him so valuable. So because of that, they may use Ty Montgomery in that type of role, say in the slot, like they split out, like New England splits out James White. They may do the same thing with Ty Montgomery again this next week against the Browns defense, against the Bears defense that so far has played pretty well against wide receivers, but they're playing well against type wide receivers. So I think in that underneath game, they may actually have a pretty successful week. The Green Bay Packers, if they can exploit that, and which may help open things up for Jordy Nelson down the field.
Yeah, look for the Bears receivers to have pretty good games because the Packers secondary is depleted once again with a couple more injuries from the Sam Shields once again sitting out this week. But we'll get back to kind of the notable fantasy starters. Doug Martin did not practice again today. This is not a good sign, in my opinion, because he was on a bye week last week. And so he had plenty of rest. There was no scheduled practices. He was on a bye, and day one, in preparation for this week's games, he's not practicing. There's no indication that he will be on the field tomorrow. But for those of you who were smart and were owners of Charles Sims, when you got the news that he was out, if you were smart enough to grab Jacquizz Rodgers that late Sunday afternoon and pick up him, to me, he'd be a starter. I know we're going to talk about him a little bit later in kind of the waiver wire pickups. But do you see Jacquizz Rodgers having a similar type game where he's going to have 30 carries, 100 yards? Do you see that kind of production coming from Jacquizz Rodgers?
Yes, because it's against San Francisco, who just got torched by.
Yeah, but
okay. Again, yes,
it's shady.
Shady McCoy is a completely different animal. He is an all-pro and has been for years. Jacquizz Rodgers is not. However, with how well the Tampa Bay offensive line was able to block for Jacquizz Rodgers, he was able to do things against Carolina that Sims has not been able to do all year in terms of running the ball. Now, again, Jacquizz only averaged 3.3 yards a carry, but Sims was only averaging like 2.5, and was more of the catch the ball out of the backfield. I think with Navarro Bowman out for San Francisco, that is he is such the life of their defense. I really think that they're going to their defense is just going to be struggling the rest of the season, and so I see that if Martin's out, Jacquizz Rodgers very well could be in for that workhorse role again.
Yeah, I call Navarro Bowman the cork because if he's not there, their defense is just an open bottle spewing out all sorts of fantasy points. And so I see Jacquizz Rodgers having a fairly decent game. I'm not projecting anything crazy like some running backs are doing, but I do see him getting about 20 carries, 80 yards, possibly a score with how San Francisco's defense has been. Even Vincent Jackson might score this week. So, but moving on, I do want to touch.
I am looking forward to Mike Evans coming off of bye this week in 3 or 4 of my leagues.
Yeah, and so because we touched on him already, LaShawn McCoy, there was some kind of like circus act because it looked like he was down and out for good, or at least for a couple of weeks with the way everyone reacted on Twitter and all these kinds of things. Then he's warming up, and then he comes back in and still torches San Francisco and scores another touchdown. And so indications are now, even with the first practice of the week, is that he's going to be okay. Rex Ryan said he's fine, he's fine, he's fine. I know we're going to talk about it a little bit later in the show once again, but LaShawn McCoy seems to be fine. If you have him, the possibility of grabbing Mike Gillislee, who did very, very serviceable. I know kind of the backup role was up in the air between him and Bush, and there was no real lead horse. But now Mike Gillislee, because of what he did when LaShawn McCoy was out, 44-yard run, Mike Gillislee, I believe, has solidified himself as the backup there. And so I believe he's someone to look at, which we'll talk about later in the show. The other one we want to talk about is Dwayne Allen going down, and this brings life once again to Jack Doyle, and hopefully his week one mirage is a mirage no more. Not saying that he will score 2 touchdowns a week, but he was the second leading pass catcher for the Colts offense against Houston this last week, and so I see that having some ramifications for later this week. What are your thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah, I think if you had Dwayne Allen, if you were like me and you still were holding on to him,
I'm sorry.
I had one league where I didn't have much of a choice. If you look at Jack Doyle, yeah, he kind of quote unquote blew up that first week. He had 3 receptions for 35 yards and 2 TDs, which was everyone was like, "Who in the heck is this guy?"
He was open twice.
Yeah. It just so happened that each of those were 5 yards from the end zone,
and no one was near him.
Yeah. So I mean, the next week, 4 for 37 against Denver, 6 for 65 against San Francisco, and then he had 2 games now against Jacksonville. Now you think Jacksonville's defense hasn't been all that good. Their defense has actually been okay, especially against the passing game. Chicago's defense is one of the it's in the top 10 in pass defense this year, believe it or not. And in those 2 games, he combined 3 catches for 14 yards.
Yeah.
Then he goes up against Houston again, another 4 catches for 53 yards and a TD. If you look at some of the matchups he has down the road, at Tennessee, Kansas City at home, at Green Bay, he does have a few favorable matchups coming up. So I would be okay to go ahead and pick him up, to kind of get rid of the Dwayne Allen plague that is right now, just with how unproductive he's been. So yeah, I think Jack Doyle could be a solid pickup if you are. If you're streaming tight ends and you like the matchup. So
another quarterback to cover is Carson Palmer did leave the game tonight, Monday Night Football game, with a strained hamstring. And I believe this is more – there's no indication yet from the sources that I have that there's anything serious. It is strained. They did pull him. But let's just face it, anybody who watched Monday Night Football knew that the Jets were not going to score a touchdown, and so Carson Palmer didn't need to be in the game. And so they pulled him. There is some concern about his hamstring because he has been dinged up. He has a history of not being able to complete a full season, so this is something to obviously be aware of, but there's no indication of anything long-term, but there's also no indication that this is just something light.
Well, and what doesn't help is the fact that who they're playing next week. Next week they have the Sunday night game against Seattle.
And what does Seattle do in Arizona?
Seattle plays very well in Arizona. Let's. I mean, if you look at the last couple of years against Arizona in Arizona, they've outscored. Oh God, what are they? They've outscored the Arizona Cardinals. Let's see. Last season it was like 35-7 or something like that.
Yeah.
So I mean, the games in Arizona the last 3 years between the Seahawks and the Cardinals have not been close at all. The games up here in Seattle, each of those has been close.
Yeah.
And Arizona's won, I want to say, 2 out of the last 4 or 2 out of the last 3. So, yeah, 2 out of the last 3, including the year that we won the Super Bowl. They were actually our last defeat was in Week 16. So, they are, in Arizona. I'd be, their defense. While Arizona's defense is playing pretty well, if they can't, if Carson Palmer is not healthy, the Legion of Boom is going to have their way with Drew Stanton. Period. So.
Just a quick kind of note here is in the last 6 games, Seattle has won 58-0, 34-22, lost at home 17-10, won 19-3 in Arizona, won 35-6 at home, lost at home 39-32, and last year won 36-6. So the games on the road, Seattle is putting up 34, 35 points plus each time.
Yeah, and that's against Arizona in Arizona. So
yes,
so that's Carson Palmer is going to need to be healthy in order for them to compete in that game. So
yeah, moving on, Jamaal Charles, according to coaches, is not ready for a full workload. I am incredibly thankful that he was able to get into the end zone and justify my cautiously optimistic start of Jamaal Charles. Once again, reports of him being sprinkled in like sprinkles on a donut in a football game that I know a lot of people thought that he was going to play. Spencer Ware is beginning to prove himself more and more. I know he had a couple of down weeks, which is leading some to believe that this could be a 60-40 split role I think once Jamaal Charles is back and fully healthy, I think it makes Spencer Ware obsolete, except for in deeper leagues where you need a handcuff. And so,
yeah, I think when seeing that Jamaal Charles was only used, what he had 10 carries or something like that, 6 carries. Yeah, and then Spencer Ware ends up going 24 for 131 and a TD.
Yeah.
All Spencer Ware owners rejoiced, even though I sat him and lost because of it.
If you're a Spencer Ware owner, I think this would be a week to get rid of him. Trade him off. He just had a big week.
If you can trade him off, maybe get something out of him. Maybe even possibly even trade him to a Jamaal Charles owner.
Exactly. That's my thoughts. Get him to a Jamaal Charles owner who's desperately thinking about a handcuff, who wants to justify their drafting of Jamaal Charles earlier than they probably should have, like me, and skipped on people like CJ Anderson. But no one really thought that Jamaal Charles was going to be out this long. But once again, if you can offload Ware to a Jamaal Charles owner, come find me because I'll grab him. And so moving on to our next person, Terrell Pryor had a little bit of a bang-up in his game. He was a monster. I know, Ryan, you're going to cover him a little bit. He is mentioned as day-to-day. This is something to monitor because this is Cleveland's offense right now, other than a running back situation. But Terrell Pryor's just kind of – he's putting the team on his back at this point and trying to will his team to at least score points. They're not really winning any ball games, but they are scoring some points. So,
yeah, I mean, if you take the if the notes from on Yahoo, he has with the hamstring injury, he's had a history of hamstring issues. And like we've been saying, he is the offense.
yes.
While Isaiah Crowell has had a tough couple of weeks, they've had defenses that are good against the run that they've had to go up against, which they've had bad matchups for Crowell. But going into it, he is the only guy targeted. I mean, you look at his targets all this season: 7, 10, 14, 9, 6, and 13. He is he is the offense when it comes to passing. And even next week, if he's not good to go, I mean, even if he's only questionable, it would be hard to start him because Corey Coleman's not going to be back, so there's no one taking pressure off of him. So if he's trying to plant a bum leg, you could be in trouble. So,
a couple of quick ones to touch up on at the end. Coming out of Seattle, Thomas Rawls is still a couple of weeks away from being cleared. Grayson Michael is doing a fabulous job in Seattle, so I think that's helping Thomas Rawls be able to sit a little bit longer than maybe he would have if Grayson Michael was struggling. I think that is good news for Seattle, being able to keep Rawls off the field, because I think once he's back, it's going to be a good 1-2 punch like they originally had planned. Stefan Diggs did not practice today. For those of you who have Stefan Diggs, you were excited for 1 week, but all this news of him continuing sitting out of practice is not good. Jordan Reed is making strides, but is not ruled out for week 7. Concussions are things that they're like, you just never know how an individual's going to react. Each concussion is different, and with the league's priority on player safety with regards to concussions, this is something to monitor. We're going to cover a few tight ends to pick up and stream, and so if you have Jordan Reed and do not have a backup tight end, I highly, highly, highly recommend looking at a couple of the ones that we're going to touch base at towards the end of the show. But that kind of wraps us up on the injury/banged up portion of the news. I know, Ryan, you're going to talk a little bit more about some breakouts and some busts. Why don't you take it away?
Well, I mean, this just because we don't want to make this too long. I'm not going to so much go over the busts, as more just the big time performances from the major positions. We'll start with the quarterbacks. Drew Brees playing in the Superdome is unstoppable. Drew Brees outside the Superdome is mortal. Let's be honest.
I have a question. Was that the Superdome or was that Carolina's defense?
Yes.
Okay. That's the answer I was expecting.
Yeah. So the Carolina defense is unfortunately is not what they were last year. The entire team is not what they were last year. Drew Brees, even with having a bye week, and so having one less week than everyone else, is still the number 4 quarterback in fantasy.
It's insane.
And so he is, 465, 4 touchdowns and an interception. Anytime that he plays in the Superdome, he is a must start.
Yes.
Especially in DFS, especially if it's a juicy matchup, he's worth the price to pay because he's going to be the top. He's going to be one of the top, most expensive quarterbacks to use, but he is worth it if he's playing at the Superdome. A surprise, I guess you could call it a breakout. I don't expect this to continue. Is Case Keenum? Here, let me just load up this week's. There we go. Case Keenum, 321 for 3 TDs and an interception. Again, that was against Detroit's terrible defense that gives up a lot of points anyways. If we look at how he's done, 4 points, 10 points, 18 points, 22 points, 8 points, 36 points. Next week he goes up against the Giants. That will be at home. We'll see how that can go. The Giants defense is playing better. It has done pretty well against the run. Their pass defense has gone back and forth. But we'll see how Case Keenum does again at home. If the defense, the only team that he's really lit up, other than Detroit's defense, is he played pretty solid against Arizona's defense. Going 18 for 30 for 266 and 2 TDs. So I think it was a great game. I think he's still a matchup-based guy only. I think week 9 he might be a good DFS player or a streaming quarterback option going up against Carolina's defense at home. So, but other than that, great game, but it's not something I'm going to bank on. I'm not going to actively go after Case Keenum.
Yeah. Plus, one thing I want to note is that they are progressively doing a little bit more passing, but they are still a run-first offense with Gurley. Yeah. It has now opened up Gurley to have less than 12 people in the box because they have proven the ability to throw over the top to Kenny Britt and be able to produce some things. But this is still a run-first, not a lot of splash. Once again, remember they played Detroit, who gave up tons of yards to the Packers as well. So I would not chase points and grab Keenum as a quarterback. I would make sure he does it again in back-to-back weeks before I would even think about streaming Keenum.
Yeah, and then you kind of the third quarterback to go over this is I'm so happy about this. Matthew Stafford, 270 for 4 and 0. 4 TDs, no interceptions. He played so much better this week, and I think part of that was the lack of penalties.
Running game?
No, it was the lack of penalties. Because if you look at the one bad game that he had was against Chicago, where he threw 213, no TDs, and 2 interceptions. His only game that he hasn't thrown a touchdown in. They had 17 penalties in that game. You cannot get into a rhythm at all if you have 17 penalties. But if you look at every other game, 32 points, was it 31 completions for 340 and 3, 22 for 261 and 1, 28 for 385, 3 and 1. Then he has the one stinker game against Chicago. Philadelphia, 19 for 180 and 3. Not a whole lot of yards, but didn't need them. He threw the touchdowns when he needed to. And was extremely efficient, 19 for 25. And then this last week, 23 for 270 and 4. He's not needing to put up the massive amount of yards, but at this point he is on pace to be the number 3 or number 4, I think number 4 quarterback in fantasy. And I predicted him to be a top 5. Now he does have some tough matchups. He still has 2 games against Minnesota and a game against Dallas. But that's for the most part, that's pretty much it against really tough defense. So one more game against Chicago, but that one will be at home, so that'll be a little bit different.
Yeah, I don't really know what to make of kind of the Detroit wide receiver situation. Stafford is definitely better this year than he has been in the past because he's not got the Megatron crutch. And so
he's not thrown into triple coverage.
Yeah, he's not just lobbing it up and playing fires up with Megatron. And so you do see him being able to find different targets. And one thing that not a lot of people accounted for is the fact that there are going to be times where Marvin Jones is going to have 2 catches. Golden Tate finally showed up for the first time this season and went off. A lot of people, including myself, thought that was going to be more of a regular occurrence and that there was going to be a little bit of a flex back and forth between Marvin Jones and Golden Tate, which hadn't happened until this game. And so Stafford has now shown that he's going to put up the points, but he can go to any of his receivers. And so it's not going to be, I have Matt Stafford's top receiver, a.k.a. Marvin Jones, who I had. He's only going to throw to Marvin Jones. It's not the case. He's going to spread the ball around. You've seen that so far this year, and I think he's a better quarterback for it, and he's getting better numbers because of it. Obviously, if you've got Stafford, you're in pretty good shape.
Yeah. So, all right, let's move on to the wide receivers. Odell, despite the man's antics,
Guy's insane.
Seriously, he proposed to the net that hit him 3 weeks ago.
He's a giant child.
Yeah, basically. And honestly, he was looking like hot garbage in the beginning of this game.
He had negative
points because of the fumble.
And I got an alert that he was injured and was sitting out.
And came out, and then he comes back into the game and goes 8 for 222 and 2.
He was on that LaShawn McCoy juice.
Whatever it was.
He just had more of it.
Yeah. So 8 for 222 and 2. I mean, we knew that Odell was not going to be held down for the whole season. He's a phenomenal talent. You cannot deny it. He's a bit of a tool, but he is a phenomenal talent.
Eli Manning might hold himself down, but Beckham should be fine.
Yeah. So I mean, you had to expect this was going to happen eventually. So, it finally did. Kenny Britt, we talked about Case Keenum. Kenny Britt, I am actually somewhat surprised that this has been happening with Kenny Britt. A lot of people are not, simply because, when he first came into the league, he was actually, showed some, he was drafted semi-high, drafted as a solid, wide receiver, and had a very good first couple games, then got injured, tore his ACL, was out for the season.
Yeah,
kind of come back and forth, just because he's been in LA, or formerly St. Louis, now in LA, with the Rams, who have been a run-focused team, and who basically have, like we've said, had hot garbage as their quarterback for years. And so finally he's getting the targets. I mean, he's a guy to own at this point. If you look, just looking at his targets, 6'10", 6'4", 6 and 8. And this last game, 7 catches for, 136 and 2 TDs. The guy is a talent, and he can get it done. I think he's a flex play just because of, again, the quarterback situation. They played a terrible defense this week. But, if Kenny Britt's available, I think he's a guy to go after. And then, like we said about Golden Tate, 8 for 165 and 1. It's finally starting to happen for Tate. You and I talked about this, Justin, but before the show, that with part of the reason that we feel that Golden Tate had the game that he had was because they had no running backs.
No.
Their running backs
signed Forsett.
They signed Forsett earlier this week, and then they had Zach Zenner as their lead back, which I was a big believer in Zach Zenner last year. Just the preseason that he had, he was starting to show some ability. I think he was averaging 4.5 yards a carry, and then I want to say it was like he cracked sternum or something, or tore a pectoral, and was out for the season last year. And this year he just hasn't had it.
Yeah.
And so because of that, they, you can kind of say that Tate was sort of like how Ty Montgomery was for the Packers this last week. So he was getting those dump off passes, basically being used as the running back out of the backfield in a sense, and was able to finally use his yards after catch ability that he has. So I think this continues for Golden Tate, not at this level, but I think that he's still capable of doing this a few more times in the season.
Yeah, Washington, who he plays next week, has struggled. They did a pretty good job at holding Philadelphia, but I think that was more the rookie Carson Wentz having a bad game. But I see Golden Tate doing he's going to be more like his first couple of games. Obviously not going to be putting up nothing, but he's going to have more of those 5-6 catches, 70, 80 yards, because he is fast. He's going to get those underneath routes. And he still has the big play capability, and Megatron's not taking all the deep balls and all the heads-up balls. And so, once again, Stafford's going to be able to facilitate and move the ball around and get to the open guy. So what I saw in this game was Tate, or at least the offensive play calling, doing a better job of getting Tate open to allow him to get the ball in open space and then run. And then that's when he torched people. And there's one play. He literally ankle juked two guys out of their jock straps, short socks. Like, they looked naked out there after Tate just made fools back to back. Like, within 5 yards of each other, both guys are just grabbing each other's ankles, falling all over the place. So, once again, if you held out on Tate, good job. You had more patience than I would have. I know that in one of my leagues, he was dropped Sunday morning. And so
he's a guy that actually the last 2 weeks I've been saying it's going to come. It's going to come. It finally did. Does. There are some tougher matchups coming up. He's got to play Minnesota twice in 3 weeks. Got to play Jacksonville. But he is going to have New Orleans, Chicago, and the Giants getting into the playoffs. So things should be better, but not this great. If you can pick him up as to be able to be used as a flex play.
Oh, you got to grab him now.
Yeah, go after him.
The number one pickup right now. I like Britt, but Stafford is better than Keenum.
Yep,
and it's not close.
All right, let's hit up some running backs now. I've got quite a few running backs here. I'm going to try to get through these quick. Here we go. First off, David Johnson, as the fantasy footballers who are actually from Arizona, and I guess they were actually at the game tonight. Just shout out to the Fantasy Footballer podcast. Again, guys, if you like listening to podcasts, they are an awesome one to listen to. We enjoy their podcast. We are not jealous here about getting as many viewers as we want. We want a ton of viewers, but if there's good information, we will tell you where to get it.
Yes,
as an area to get it. And them being from Arizona, they love David Johnson. They have their own theme song for David Johnson. But seriously.
And I like David Johnson. I'm a Seahawks fan.
Yeah. This is a guy that I predicted last season, at the beginning of last season, he was going to have that breakout year. He was that rookie that I drafted late to take over the role.
Me.
And he, end of the season proved that he could be that guy. This season, so many people were questioning him. He is now, this year, he is the leading yardage guy or all-purpose yards in the league.
Where's he at touchdowns? He's 2 behind what? DeMarco Murray?
Let me pull that up. Let me right backs. Oh, whoops. Seasonal.
I'll pull it up. You keep going.
He finished with 111 yards for 3 TDs and 3 catches for 27 yards. The guy can do it all. He is an every down back. I wish me being the zero running back strategy guy, he was not a guy that I was going to go after simply because, I was cautious, but I knew that he was going to be a player that was going to just take off, that he was not a mirage. He was the real deal. And so, yeah, he was the number 1 point getter this week. Number 2, Ajayi, 204 yards and 2 TDs against a Pittsburgh defense that, let's be honest, the entire Pittsburgh team struggles away from Pittsburgh, period.
And anything short underneath routes.
Just not just their defense, their offense. Big Ben has trouble away from Pittsburgh.
Yeah, he's got the biggest point spread between home and away games as a quarterback for the last 5 seasons.
To quote the fantasy footballers, the difference between his numbers in Pittsburgh and his numbers out of Pittsburgh is a full Blaine Gabbert game, like 12 points. And so Jay Ajayi had a phenomenal game. I think for now, especially, he holds on to that number 1 running back. It's going to be a little, I guess you could say, testy, just because they have 4 running backs there. They have Arian Foster. They're still trying to make sure that he stays healthy. But, if you can get a Jay Ajayi, I think his availability is still pretty high. He's available in 68% of leagues. So he's definitely got to go after. Again, we talked about Shady McCoy in Buffalo, 140-3. He's making my bust pick on him, making me look like an idiot. But you know what? At least I was right about Matt Forte.
Yeah.
So, Shady McCoy, awesome, just a phenomenal game. Lamar Miller, finally, Lamar Miller had that game that we all knew he was capable of, going for 149-1, 3 catches for 29 yards, and another TD.
But he had to do it against the Colts.
But we knew. But okay. But again, look at the defenses that he played in his first 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Chicago's defense, who's played, again, for the most part, pretty well against the run. While he has not had any TDs up to this point, he still had 15.5 points, 11 points, 14.5 points, 13.5 points. Then he had the Minnesota game where he had 8 attempts for 20 yards. But he has had 106, 83, 80, 82, and then finally, he had the 20 and then 149 in this one. He is getting the yards. It was simply that they couldn't get him into the end zone. And I blame Brock Osweiler for that, for not getting them far enough down the field to be able to use him in the red zone. So finally they were able to do that. Next week it's going to be really tough sledding there in Denver. So Lamar Miller is going to have another rough game. Now Denver has been giving up the yards on the ground.
Yeah.
So he's still, but with how much they're going to focus on Brock Osweiler and just want to destroy him, Lamar Miller, it may be tough sledding for him. Yeah,
well, you got to look with the Denver defense thing, just to touch on. You got to look at who they've played in the last couple of weeks. When Denver has a solid running back and a quarterback to kind of offset that, they've struggled against the run. And so they didn't do too well against San Diego. They didn't do too well against Atlanta. And the only thing that is going to hamper Lamar Miller, once again, is going to be Brock Osweiler. So if Brock Osweiler can begin to hit his tight end again and begin to hit his receivers, or instead of trying to sail the ball over their heads, if he can actually hit his receivers, I see Miller having a better game. He's not going to replicate what he did this last week, but I see, once again, he's going to get his 20 to 30 carries. He's going to get at least 80 yards. It's what he does.
Yeah.
I'm projecting 100 yards, 1 touchdown. That's my projection.
And then one more. In terms of fantasy points, he wasn't near the top in fantasy points. I want to say, where was he? He finished just under 20. I think he was number 10 for the week, number 11 or 12. Now, I want to preface this. I'm not admitting to being wrong, okay? Because here's the deal. I never said that Ezekiel Elliott was going to be a bad running back. I never said that. You can go back and listen to any of our podcasts. I never said that Ezekiel Elliott was going to be a bad running back. What I said was I am cautious about a rookie running back having a ton of success in this league. Now, again, that doesn't make me wrong, okay? But he has shown that he is a phenomenal running back. And yes, he came into the right situation in Dallas where they are a run-heavy offense with the number one offensive line in the league. You know, I have no problems admitting that he is, I mean, good grief. If you look at his totals so far going into the season, and now they're going into a bye week, 51 yards and a TD, 83 yards and a TD. The last 4 weeks, 140, 138 and 1, 134 and 2, and then 157 against the Green Bay defense, who had been giving up less than 80 yards a game on the ground. He is a man-child. I mean, he is an absolute beast. He is the real deal. Again, I never said that he wasn't going to be good. If he was, awesome. I wasn't. That was just a risk I wasn't willing to take. For those who did, good job, guys. It paid off.
Yep.
So that I wanted to just throw in my 2 cents on Ezekiel Elliott, because I think because of how many touchdowns were scored and so many guys that had bigger games in terms of fantasy points, I wanted to make sure that, you know, Ezekiel Elliott is the real deal. He will get his touchdowns.
Ryan, if you want to hit up our advertising, and then we will get quickly through our waiver picks of the week and those that you want to be looking to pick up for your waivers.
All right, so we're going to start off NFLshop.com. They're the official online store of the National Football League, and they offer the biggest selection of officially licensed NFL apparel and merchandise online. Shoppers looking for Nike jerseys and the game day collection featuring apparel from Nike, headwear from New Era. They will find that all everything they want for all 32 teams at NFLshop.com. If you go to skullkingfootball.com/NFL shop, that's where you can go through our links. If you sign up through the link that we have on our website for their email and mobile updates, you'll actually get 10% off your first order. Again, sign up through skullkingfootball.com/NFL shop. We've got a link on there that you can sign up to get 10% off your first order. And then also the other one is Yahoo Daily Fantasy. They are our preferred fantasy DFS platform of choice. They're the industry leader in fair play for DFS platforms. They make it easier for the little guy to be able to compete in their daily fantasy contests with their fair play standards. They limit the amount of entries you can have to 10 per contest, and they even have a provision where you can only have entries 1% of the entries. So if there's only 100 entries in a contest, you can only put in 1. So they also identify veteran players with a badge, so you can see who you're going up against, who the big time players are that have been, you know, are winning a lot of money, who are constantly on there. You can see who those guys are. So if you want to maybe avoid a couple of those contests and play against some beginners, they do have beginner contests on there as well for you to be able to, you know, really get into it. So again, go to skullkingfootball.com/Yahoo Daily. Sign up through the links that we have on there, and we have a little provision on there that if you go through that link, we will actually set you up with a free Skull King Football Premium membership. So make sure to go to skullkingfootball.com/Yahoo Daily, sign up for your Yahoo DFS account, and get a free premium membership on Skull King Football. Back to you.
Okay, and moving on into our waiver pickups of the week. These are guys you want to be looking to add depending on your roster. Once again, we always preface this with just because we say to pick up a player, always put into account your roster. Do you need a running back? There's no reason to pick up our selection at running back if you have solid running backs. And so don't waste your fab cash or your waiver wire position just to pick up the hottest quote-unquote running back if you are solid in those positions. Not a common mistake, but I do know that people like to run at points, and just because someone on the waivers scored more points than their guy on their bench doesn't mean you have to go switch them. And so kind of my first pick, I alluded to it a little bit earlier, is Ja'Quiz Rodgers. Coming off the bye and with Doug Martin still not healthy, did not participate in practice once again today. Ja'Quiz Rodgers is someone that I'm looking to get another 100-yard game out of. And with Doug Martin still kind of waffling. This could be a continual thing to where the next couple of weeks, and even when Doug Martin comes back, just Quiz Rogers can take up that Charles Sims role as the kind of change of pace, catch the ball out of the backfield kind of role. I still think Ja'Quiz Rogers will be relevant even if Doug Martin returns in the next couple of weeks or even next week. And so that's kind of my waiver wire running back selection. Once again, Ja'Quiz Rogers is only available in 78% of leagues. He's only owned in 22%. Another one I want to mention just briefly is Mike Gillislee, just because of the potential fear of injury, of continual injury with LaShawn McCoy. They ride him hard, and the potential for injury is high because of the workload he's taking. But the only thing that happened to him was just that little bit of a banged-up knee. Ryan, who do you have at the running back position as a pickup for this week?
Honestly, for me, it's Ajayi. And I want to preface this by, don't go chasing points just to chase points. But Ajayi had a phenomenal game, and he basically proved to his coach. I mean, his coach wasn't even expecting this. They want to ease Arian Foster back in. I think that if they can finally get if both of them can be healthy, I think they both can be productive. If Ajayi is the hammer back and they use Arian Foster catching the ball out of the backfield, which has actually always been his strength. Even when he was in Houston, was last year when he was finally healthy for 4 games. He was not a great runner. He was only getting 2.5 to 3 yards a carry. However, he was extremely useful catching the ball out of the backfield, and that's where he was getting most of his production. So if Miami can go to that, if they can get Arian Foster healthy to be able to use him as a pass catching back out of the backfield and use Ajayi, and if they can use him this way as that hammer, that thunder and lightning kind of a combo, I think that Ajayi could be a solid running back 2. And I don't think he's going to put up running back numbers every week. It's not going to happen. But with some of the players that they've got coming in, or some of the teams that they're going up against, I do think that Ajayi could be productive, could be a solid running back 2 based on the matchup. And so he's a little hard to trust, again, with them having 4 running backs that they've been using. But I think that Ajayi is worth a flyer. He's only 32% owned. He's going to be highly sought after with people chasing points. So if you don't need him, don't bother.
Yeah.
If you have a solid running back core, don't even bother with it. But if you are in desperate need of a running back, I do think that he will provide running back 2. One thing I want to throw in there before this game against Pittsburgh. He was averaging 3.7 yards per carry. He did have 2 touchdowns. Now, he did more than double his previous yards in this game against Pittsburgh, and then doubled his total touchdowns. With this, he has solidified himself as at least the solid number 2, depending on how well Foster comes back. But Buffalo, bye, Jets, San Diego, LA, San Francisco. A couple of those teams are going to be tough on the defensive side, but the Jets, San Diego, and San Francisco, those are going to be good games. Ajayi more towards picking him up than towards letting him go. So, yeah. All right. What position you want to move to next?
Going to the next position, to me, the only receiver that I would really look to target right now is Kenny Britt, owned in 12% of leagues. I want to have you listen to this. He has only got less than 67 total yards in a game once this season. So he's getting yardage. So right now, other than one game in standard leagues, he has got you at least 6 points. Now, that may not be kittens and roses, but with the emergence of a more pass-happy offense, once again, they're still going to default to Gurley for first couple of plays. They're going to be a run-first offense. Kenny Britt is the receiver to own because of his size, his ability physically to go. I mean, he just manhandled himself to 2 touchdowns. And so that kind of force, once again, LA plays in a very, very tough NFC West. that plays very well against the pass. But if I'm looking at any receiver, I'm definitely not looking at Hunter Henry. I'm looking at Kenny Britt.
For me, I've got two wide receivers. One of them is Cameron Meredith. He's owned in 52% of leagues, so he's 48% available. And here's the reason why. Brian Hoyer looks his direction. He's looking his direction instead of Alshon Jeffrey. He has, in the last two games, 27 targets, 20 catches for 243 yards and a TD. Brian Hoyer is looking his way. And as long as Brian Hoyer's there, Brian Hoyer's thrown for 300 yards in 4 straight games now. So they are throwing the crap out of the ball. Jordan Howard is still, Brother Bear is still running the ball pretty well. But they're going to throw the ball in order to stay in games. And because of that, Cameron Meredith is the guy that Hoyer's looking to. And so if you're in desperate need of some wide receivers, I think he's a solid flex play to plug in your lineup every week, especially this next week against Green Bay, who can't stop anyone through the air. So I think Cameron Meredith would be a really solid pickup for this next week. So, and then the other one I've got is Dante Moncrief. I still love Dante Moncrief. I know He's only had the one game. He got injured in week 2 and has been out with the broken shoulder blade since then. Pagano has said that he is getting there. He's getting close. I think maybe in the next week or two. So if you have room to stash him on your bench, go ahead. The wide receivers for the Colts have been appalling, other than T.Y. Hilton, who has been averaging 10 targets a week. Other than him, they've had nothing. And Dante Moncrief can bring a new presence, especially with Dwayne Allen out now. Once he is healthy, he will be that big body with Jack Doyle to get the targets in the red zone. So, yeah,
and one other name that I want to throw out there, going back to the running back position, looking at someone who has been injured, who is now coming off of injury, Dion Lewis. He was a giant monster with Tom Brady last year before his injury. Was on track to be a very, very high pick this year before complications with his leg. I look for Dion Lewis to slowly be put back into a role and really be able to take full command of that passing back out of the backfield after the bye in Week 10 against Seattle. So once again, if you can afford to stash a running back, I look for Dion Lewis because he's proven it. He's on a great team. And as far as I can tell, there's no one standing in his way.
Well, I mean, James White is the guy kind of standing in his way, and Bill Belichick's been known to, with guys coming off of injury or anything, to basically just leave them out to pasture if someone's already producing, which James White has done the last couple weeks. But Dion, here's the deal. I would wait on Dion Lewis, and here's why. Because he's not expected to come back until at least Week 8. They have Week 7, Week 8. The bye week is Week 9, and then he's projected to come back Week 10 against Seattle at home. So I would wait. If you could pick him up maybe in Week 9 when no one's still going to be on him because he's not coming back till at least Week 10, if you can pick him up on the bye week, I think that would be a solid spot to pick him up. So, but yeah, I agree with you to watch for Dion Lewis. So,
Ryan, tell me who you like at the tight end position.
I like Hunter Henry. He's proving to be a tight end one. Even with Antonio Gates still there and not out of it. In the last 2 games, with Gates available and playing, Hunter Henry has had 3 catches on 4 targets for 74 yards and a TD, and 6 catches on 8 targets for 83 yards and a TD. I'm pretty sure that it doesn't really matter if Antonio Gates is there or not. Hunter Henry is going to get the yards, and he's going to get the red zone looks. I know that we said at the beginning of the year that Antonio Gates is going to be the guy. They want to get him the touchdown record. He needs like 7 or 8 in order to tie it.
He needs I believe 8.
Yeah, at this point,
I don't see it at this point.
I'm not seeing it. Hunter Henry is taking over, and he is a rarity as a rookie tight end. He is. I mean, I honestly think he's a guy to own. That you need to have him, and because I am so desperate at tight end right now, he will be my number one waiver priority in one of my leagues. So Hunter Henry, and the other guy. This is one that people are going to think I'm absolutely crazy. CJ Fedora Whatz.
I hate you.
Why, were you going to take that one?
Yes, but
Okay.
Go ahead.
You go ahead and talk about Fedora Whatz. Go ahead.
This is what I like about Fedora Whatz. Is the fact that we're even mentioning his name, I guarantee you that there are people listening to this podcast that are going to have to Google his name, possibly, because he's only owned in 1% of the leagues. He plays for Houston, and his name is not Miller or Hopkins. And so the last couple of games, he's played against Tennessee, Minnesota, and Indianapolis. 2 of those teams are very, very good defenses in Tennessee and Minnesota. He's getting anywhere from 4 to 6 catches. He's getting about 50 to 60 yards, but he's got 2 touchdowns. The first 3 weeks, he was a no-namer, but as Brock Osweiler is getting more adjusted to this offense, I believe he's getting more used to the checkdowns to his tight end, getting his tight end more involved. You see them be more successful in their offense when they're getting the tight end more involved. I mean, they were just getting manhandled by Minnesota, but Minnesota's the best defense in the league fantasy point production, in my opinion. But Fedora Whatz had 4 catches for 61 yards. And so against Denver, I'm not worried. He's going to have a good game against Detroit. He's going to have a bye. Jacksonville, Oakland, San Diego. I am not fearful for any defense he's going up against, except for possibly Denver. Other than that, he's going to have a cakewalk,
and then maybe
second half of the season.
Maybe Cincinnati in championship week. But again, right now he's still considered a streamer. So if you can have him for a lot of those matchups, I think that he is the tight end to own in Houston.
Yeah, but okay. Not that I'm counting on this, but I'm kind of counting on this. Cincinnati will fold. They'll do that. I'm less concerned. To me, I'm more concerned about getting guys to the playoffs. I think Fedora Whatz is someone that no one else is going to be targeting. You can be the sneaky guy. I'm looking at Fedora Whatz more if you have a tight end already and you want a secondary option to kind of pick between 2 and stream between 2 without having to desperately try and find somebody on waivers.
Correct. I think that's a good way to go. So.
And then there's always Doyle, but that's more just because of the injury.
And we covered
that. We covered that already. And so, are there any other players that you want to touch on? Oh, you had a quarterback.
I had 2, and one of them we mentioned last week, but this week Marcus Mariota. He's proven to be a solid a solid quarterback, not just a streamer. But these last 2 weeks now, yes, he's gone up against Miami's defense, but that was at Miami, and he did much better against Miami than Big Ben did. He went up against Cleveland this last week, and again, only threw 24 times and completed 17 of them, but for 284, 3 touchdowns and an interception. So he's got Indianapolis, who obviously hasn't been great on defense. He's got Jacksonville in the Thursday night game on the 27th, then San Diego, Green Bay, Indianapolis again. So, I mean, his next 5 weeks are really, really nice. So if you're, if you're having trouble with your quarterback or if you're streaming, I think Marcus Mariota is a solid pickup. And he is he's 60% owned right now in Yahoo. And the other one, again, I kind of talked about him last week, Brian Hoyer, who now for the 4th straight game has thrown for over 300 yards, and he's thrown for at least 36 pass attempts in every week every week that he has been the starter. 49, 36, 43, 49. And like I said, they're going up against Green Bay. Green Bay's offense has been struggling, but they seem to play pretty well in prime time, especially against the Bears. And it'll be at Green Bay. So I think that the Bears may need to throw a lot in order to stay in it, and obviously the Green Bay secondary is very vulnerable, and with Cameron Meredith and Alshon Jeffrey to throw to, Brian Hoyer could have a very good game. It could be a solid streaming option this week.
The quarterback I want to touch on just a little bit. I know he's not necessarily he's only 73% of the leagues, but once again, this is more streaming the horrible defense of Detroit. If you have Kirk Cousins, I think this is a perfect time to start him. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next show. But he's only owned at 73%. I know a lot of people are down on him, but it's a little bit of a stretch as a pickup option. But he's going to have a big game. He throws a lot of yards. Detroit gives up a lot of yards. Even with Jordan Reed out, possibly for this week, I still like Kirk Cousins later on this week. So,
yeah, I think that's exploiting the Detroit defenses.
That's streaming the opposing defense rather than streaming the quarterback.
Yeah, Detroit defense is moving their way to Cleveland territory. So,
yeah, which is kind of sad. And so, if there's nothing else that we are looking to add, once again, thank you for stopping by the Skull King Fantasy Football Podcast. We enjoy doing this. We love being able to provide this information for you guys. Once again, the show is brought to you by Vox DFS Firelines and VoxDFS.com. My name is Justin Skullroot, your host.
And I'm Ryan Skullroot, the founder of Skull King Football.
Have a good week, guys.
All right, we'll talk to you later.